and probably not very educated. And on top of that, they have that idealistic drive to spread their art, impact their fans, get rich and famous to prove all their haters wrong, which means while you're screwing them over, they're gonna work harder than ever for you.
Okay, I agree with only the third characteristic that he brought up. Number one, I don't think actually most musicians are poor. In fact, I think musicians generally need to have a lot of leisure time in order to be able to learn an instrument. So they don't treat it as leisure time, but they practice more than a person who's living hand to mouth would be able to practice in order to learn to acquire the skills on their instrument. You know what I mean? Like most musicians, at least in our Western, cultural context. In general, you learn music through hours and hours and hours of practice, and those hours and hours and hours of practice undoubtedly mean that you are not out there slinging newspapers, or you're not out there like doing other things that you need to do in order to make money. In fact, if you want to really get into music, at some point you have to forego making money for quite a bit of time in order to get good enough to make money. So I don't think that they're necessarily poor. In fact, I think that making music is often an endeavor, at least making a professional career out of music is often an endeavor that is kind of associated with middle class, upper middle class. I don't think it's a poor thing necessarily to do. And I also disagree that musicians are uneducated. I think that in many ways musicians are some of the smartest people that you encounter, because they're generally able to adapt to many different kinds of environments and many different types of intellectual activity. So I think that making music itself, if you are an actual complete musician that deals in like, harmony and melody and rhythm, and you know how to read music and all that stuff, you're actually probably a pretty decently educated individual, regardless of whether you went to any kind of schooling to be educated in other fields than music. But the third thing is certainly true. Your pursuit of fame and your pursuit of sort of the pleasures and the glories of being in the music industry is itself a currency that is leveraged against you with all aspects of the industry. If somebody in the industry is like, taking notice of you, one of the ways that in which they're sizing you up is trying to see, well, how badly do you want to pursue the idea of being famous? Because we can sell you fame, or we can compensate with you with fame in a way that is not necessarily monetary. And that's where people kind of think that it turns into a scam, or I think, but I'm going to keep on going in this video and just see what people think.
And the best part, thanks to the celebrity culture in America, there is an endless supply of them.
But no more if you let me inside your world.
So let's learn the art of enslaving artists.
But keep in mind, those people are probably not getting record deals, right? People that are like not actually that good are probably not getting a record deal. But anyways.
Damn, me. Who work for who?
Absolutely. So the status quo here is artists have been getting screwed since the beginning of time. Where's the value going? It's going into the pockets of the rights holders, and they write these contracts that are so convoluted that they essentially strip away every last piece of value, and everybody's getting paid except the artists.
So what it's saying right here, and it's giving us a sort of like flow chart that doesn't look like any kind of actual statistical representation that I've ever seen of anything. But what I think they're trying to say is that there's for an artist that generates a lot of money, then there's going to be all of these different tiers of people taking off value from that are going to be involved in generating this person's money. So an artist that gets a quote-unquote record deal, or whatever they're referring to as a record deal right now, are going to have a lot of intermediaries. And they keep on bringing up like the eternal and sophisticated and overly complicated contract. And I just think that, like, listen, there's pretty much no industry in which you make contracts that are not sophisticated and complex. That's why you have contracts to begin with, to really deal with all of the potential uncertainties that go into business transactions. You've got to have a contract that addresses enough points within it to cover any of the potential pitfalls, right? So a simple one-page contract seems really appealing, but it leaves open a lot of liability on either the artist side or on the label side or on the two parties doing the contract, that you're really like doing yourself a disservice if you try to rely on simplicity as the way of moving forward with what are probably complex steps in your career. But here's what it says. A major label artist has the best chance of finding an audience but gets the smallest share. And it gives us here that, you know, it makes a case using Spotify, saying that of every dollar that they receive, 90 cents is subscription revenue and 10 cents is from advertising revenue. Then of that, Spotify keeps, it seems to say 29 cents, and then 59 cents goes to a record label, and the record label keeps 50 cents, while 9 cents of that goes to the artist, and then 6 cents goes as performance royalties. And here they're talking about two avenues of performance royalties, one of which is the master, and then one of which is the artist. But ultimately what it has here is that the artist is getting 18 cents off of every dollar when that money goes through Spotify. And I'm not 100% sure that that is completely accurate, or that applies to all situations, right? Because Spotify is just one platform. That's what people don't understand. It's one platform through which you make money as a musician. But let's say for every dollar made on Spotify, an artist is getting 18 cents. Let's take that at face value, and then perhaps further on in this video, I'll maybe talk about whether there's a way to analyze that in terms of its fairness or not fairness or whatever it is. So let's just keep on going.
Artist gets paid last and they get paid the least.
So the point that they're making is that, like, in something like Spotify, the artist is the one that gets paid last and the one that gets paid the least. And I would venture to say that even though, you know, like, let's say at the CEO level of something like a big company, like let's say of Home Depot or whatever, whoever's the CEO of Home Depot, the person like way at the top just getting all of the thing. If you were to talk about the say like the sale of one power drill and whatever profit came from that, and how it trickled up to the top of the senior management who gets like their piece of it, you would be describing a situation where they effectively get the last payment, right? And they are not getting the least because their employees are paid hourly, much less than the CEO is. But if you think about it, like the you know, entity that manufactured and that shipped and that packaged and that did all these other sort of like supplementary things to that power drill so that it could be sold at Home Depot, that ensured its transport from one place to the other, whatever. All of those are collecting like pieces of that transaction. And so I don't think that, for example, for every dollar worth of power drill sold in Home Depot, that the CEO of Home Depot gets 18 cents off of it. I would be very, very surprised if that were the case. And so let's just keep that in full view when we're analyzing whether the Spotify, you know, revenue stream, as they're describing it here, is something that is indeed fair or not.
The music industry it is a joke.
They got into ownership equity deals with the streaming services in
I love this interview with Billy Corgan. I watched it a bunch of times, and I think he seems like he really, I think, does know what he's talking about, but he is talking from the point of view of somebody who had a really big stake in the old system that existed before now. So if you were, you know, someone like him and you rode over that speed bump, then you're likely not too happy with how things are now.
in arrangement for them to have an equity position, they agreed to very low rates for the artist's music.
One band that we're in is going to make us all this money and be our sole source of income. I think that's gone.
Every band needs to really pay attention to what their record contract.
Still don't get.
And listen, you need to pay attention to what your record contract says. Why would you not pay attention to what your record contract says? You have to pay attention to what your record contract says. He's saying it like there's some reason that you should be wary because it's something that you have to pay attention to. But you should pay attention to every contract that you sign, even if you sign a contract that, you know. So my point is just like it's a little bit, I don't know, maybe intentionally trying to seem more severe than it really is. It's like, yes, it's a contract with clauses and with a series of things that you need to pay attention to.
Paid for anything we do, and we travel around town to town hoping for scraps of food and
Yeah, the music business plays this Jedi mind trick on you where the whole thing's set up to be rapacious and take advantage of your weakness.
Yes, it is in a way that. I mean, like I'm saying, your pursuit of fame and your pursuit of some kind of glory is currency that is leveraged against you in the music industry. That's because they know that you want to be in front of large crowds of people, and that is going to be, at the very least, a very enriching and fulfilling and probably orgasmic experience for you as an artist or a performer. So they're going to know that you on some level want to be there, and that therefore the amount that they have to pay you to be there is not commensurate with the value that you're going to generate. It's the value you're going to get from it, right? You're going to get this experience. So they're selling that to you in a way that is true. And by the way, it says the music industry, the business of enslaving artists. I don't know. I just want to point that out. That's a pretty loaded way of describing it.
It's the 1980s and you're a record label looking for artists to sign. The 80s are seen as the glory days of music for a lot of reasons. There were all these new genres taking off, people were listening to everything from folk music to pop to hard rock, and for artists, life was good. Back then, a record deal was a pretty huge achievement. You would approach an up-and-coming artist, offer them a record deal, and once they signed, 85% of the profits from their music releases and albums would go to you, and 15% would go to them. Sure, it may seem a little unfair at first, but this was before the internet. You couldn't really reach a wide audience on your own. It was hard to tour on a global level on your own. Not signing with a label and keeping 100% of nothing is still nothing. On top of that 15%, artists could keep all the money they made from concerts and merchandise. So it was a pretty good deal.
So there again, though, you see what I'm saying? Like, people, they're talking about the glory days in the 80s before streaming, and they're saying that the artist at that time was likely to keep 15% of their earnings or their royalties from the sales of the songs. But we just saw the flow chart that said from Spotify that for every dollar the artist is keeping 18 cents, so they're keeping more of a percentage now than perhaps what this is describing. So right there, I think that the description of this as the glory days is ignoring the fact that for every Queen or for every Led Zeppelin, there were 1,000 other bands that made absolutely no money and that were also, being courted into a life of glamour and glory so that they could one day be rich and famous, and kind of being sold that dream and sold that opportunity to be in front of so many audiences. And I kind of think that to analyze it from the point of view, well, life was good for Queen. It's like, yeah, life is good for a lot of artists right now. Life is also good for Post Malone, but the existence of Post Malone does not make this the glory days in comparison to everything else. I think the existence of success stories, or let's say the abundance of success stories, or the increased abundance of success stories in one time or the other, would be what makes something the glory days versus the not glory days, or the days when things were great versus the days when things were bad. In this case, I really, really, really don't think we should base our perception of how the music industry in general operated by how good it was for someone like Queen, or how good it was for somebody like Snoop Dogg or something like that, because they were the 1 in a million or 1 in 10 million or whatever. And now you have that 1 in a million scenario as well, but there's maybe a much broader pool of people that can get into it. But anyways, let's keep on watching.
You see, musicians usually don't have good business acumen. They are craftsmen, not business people. So signing with a record label left them free to focus on the creative side, while you, the label, did all the business stuff to blow them up.
Now, right then and there, just listen to what he said. You don't have the business acumen, right? Or the artist does not have the business acumen. So they need to sign with the label to have the label do all the business stuff. And in a way, this is framed in the video right now as being like a situation where the label is taking advantage. But what if you just simply acknowledge that they're offering different sides of a thing that need to exist? So there's a label that is offering business services, and you don't know about business, and you're an artist, and you need someone's business acumen to help you get a career within your art. So then my thing is like, well, why are you calling this, some kind of death trap or whatever, when really you need business acumen? You need somebody with a suit and tie to help you make the right business moves. And here you are an artist, you can focus on the creative thing. That should ideally be the case, right? You should be focusing on your creative stuff, and somebody else with a suit and a tie and a telephone and whatever should be focusing on moving your business forward. And so far in there, that seems to accurately describe what the label and artist relationship should look like.
So back then, record labels and artists had a somewhat symbiotic relationship. There was still plenty of bad stuff going on, but record labels served as a legitimate engine to getting music out to the masses. But then came the internet, and it changed everything.
Okay, so the internet changed everything. Cool. That's the understatement of the century.
Napster says it's willing to pay to play, but will consumers stay loyal?
The latest software makes it a bit too easy for students to access their favorite tunes.
Legal troubles over copyright infringement aren't slowing down Napster. The song-swapping company is now in the top 50 list of most visited sites on the web, according to Mediametric.
Popular internet sites for downloading music. A federal court ruled Monday Napster must stop allowing music fans to swap copyrighted material.
It's time for Napster to stand down and build their business.
Yeah, so here's the thing. Napster created a platform on which you could basically exchange music, or you could upload music and download music freely, for free, right? So that did, in fact, change everything, because before you would have had to print your music to a vinyl or to a reel-to-reel or to a cassette or to a CD or whatever the medium was. But if there's no more medium and somebody can share a piece of music in its entire quality with someone by just sending them a file, and it's of no cost to each person that's doing it, then there's a situation there that is beyond the control of a record label or the musicians or whatever. This was a very disruptive technology to the economics of music, and I don't discount how that disruption may have negatively affected the careers of some or most artists of that era, but then the question, 25 years later now is kind of, where have we emerged, and are we emerging in a better direction or in a worse direction? That's what, I think that it's worthwhile to look at this video and analyze.
Business the old-fashioned way. They must seek permission first.
At first, it looked like the internet was gonna make life hell for record labels, not artists. Suddenly, people could download pirated versions of songs off the internet or watch music videos online. CDs, vinyls, radio stations, and TV channels like MTV became obsolete. No one was gonna wait hours for a TV show to play their favorite song if they could just stream it online. And no one was gonna buy a CD for $10 to $15 if they could just pirate the songs for free. Everyone was losing money. But
and on some level, this has happened and could happen in any industry at any time. When Uber came around, everybody who drove taxis was really mad, right? And then, but it benefited customers, right? It benefited people who are like looking for a ride somewhere that, if you lived in San Francisco, there's no taxis going around. There never were, you know what I mean? So it's not like, you live in New York, maybe you could look at taxi as a suitable alternative. Same might have happened to, FedEx or the post office when Gmail came around, and I don't see why we would get mad at the fact that you no longer have to send a letter. I mean, letters are cool, but when you want to just like make sure that somebody shows up at the right time at next Thursday at a party or whatever, you don't have to write them a letter. You want to send them an email or send them a text or whatever. And so that's just technology making things better, so.
At least artists could still make money from things like touring and merch. Record labels were in serious danger, and it wasn't about to get any better. After the nightmare that is the internet, came YouTube and online streaming apps like SoundCloud and Spotify. It made it a million times easier for people to access music for free, or as little as $5 to $10 a month, versus $10 to $15 for a single album. It's hard to describe just how much damage the internet caused to record labels.
So you can look at it as damage, but again, they made it easier to access the music, right? So here come platforms that make it easier to access the music, to share the music, more cheap to share the music and everything. And again, those platforms are not competing with CDs and tapes and all of that stuff. If Napster existed or anything like it existed where people can trade for free, then the option of selling them a CD is out the window, right? You're not going to you sell them vinyl now, but it's going to, basically, they're no longer going to buy a piece of music as their primary means of doing it because they can obtain it for free. So therefore, something like SoundCloud or YouTube or Spotify, they have to come in and offer an alternative to that is that costs little enough to compete with the otherwise free but perhaps less safe and less stable method of Napster or whatever file sharing service would emerge. And to this day, if you really did want to download a bunch of songs and keep them on a hard drive somewhere, but no reason for anybody to do that, but if you did want to do that, there are tons of services where you can just download. I mean, you can download the songs off of YouTube if you wanted to, like using a pirated service or whatever. And I guess that's totally fine. But my point is that people can still do the free thing, but they don't. They actually pay for it because it's been made easy and cost effective enough for them to do so. So that is not a small thing, right? That is there was this big technological disruptive shift that pivoted the music industry in this direction where nobody's going to make any money. And then here came these platforms and figured out how can we pivot it back towards a little bit of a money-making direction and make it somehow a little bit more democratized for the artists that want to access audiences in this really easy way, not easy, but this really organic way using the technology at hand, and then ultimately are participating in a system that perhaps generates less payment per song than what they're used to, but ultimately it is what it is.
They have been hemorrhaging money, but at least now, people weren't straight up pirating music as much. Back in the 80s, 95% of the revenue in the music industry came from CD sales, so CD sales were propping up the entire industry. Now, 75% came from streaming. So the question became, how do we, the record labels, get a cut of that streaming revenue so it doesn't just go to streaming platforms and artists? And finally, you hatched an idea. A way to get back to the good old days when you were making millions. But this time, it was at the complete expense of artists.
I mean, okay, so these are artists that are somehow into... Oh, this is going to be some dumbass commercial here. I'm going to let it play through and then skip it. These are two parties to an agreement, right? So two parties to an agreement, assuming that you have a label and you have an artist and they're, an equal... they're partnering to generate one piece of value that they're going to split between the two of them, then any move made in one direction or the other is at the expense of the other, right? So to describe it as like, well, they did everything they did at the expense of artists, it's like, well, yeah, I mean, ultimately what they have to determine is like, what is going to incentivize us to want to work on behalf of artists? And they're not going to do that if they're not going to make money, and whatever money they make will be at the expense of artists. So at the end of the day, what an artist has to decide is how much money am I willing to cut off for someone with a suit and a tie and a telephone to do the business for me. And I hear artists complain about it a lot, but I don't know that many artists that really could do the business on their own or should do the business on their own if push came to shove. Right? So therefore you have to cut something off to someone, and you could argue all day that the person that you're cutting off to, you're cutting off to them too much. But if you're cutting off to them enough to incentivize them to do the work to generate that money for you, then it kind of is what it is, right? You have to cut off enough to incentivize them to do it. If not, you might not get someone with sufficient talent, insight, and know-how to really work on your behalf and, again, generate the right type of contract and put you in the right type of situations to actually generate a career as an artist, right? You as an artist will most likely not be able to do that for yourself. And if you do it for yourself, you are most likely going to run into some of the same trade-offs that labels are having to make, right? You're going to have to pay people yourself out of this money that you make. So while you're not cutting off percentages, you're cutting off checks to all these different people. It may ultimately balance out to be the same thing. So, sweet. The deal of a lifetime, and then there's creepy music. Let's see what it has to say.
As a record label, you had a lot going against you in the early 2000s. Your solution? Create a new kind of record deal that would make up for the loss in CD sales. So you found a way to legally take as much control of their lives as you wanted. Enter the modern day record deal. No longer was it a symbiotic relationship. According to these new record deals, once an artist signed, record labels got ownership of both the masters and publishing rights. This means you own the rights to the actual music they created, plus the rights for them to perform this music at concerts online pretty much everywhere.
So, I mean, what he's saying is like, I hope they elaborate on it, because I think that he's making a very like broad claim about, you know, most record deals are not necessarily taking ownership of all of the master and all of the publishing, therefore all of your royalties. That's not usually how it works. There are record deals where that does happen, but I don't think that that's the majority. And I also think that it's not out of the question that a record company should own part of your master and part of your publishing if it's in the contract and there's a reason for it. So let's just keep on, but I want to just flag that right there.
This would be kind of like the equivalent if I signed with some YouTube agency and they owned this actual video instead of me. Now you weren't just making money from album sales, which was now non-existent. You were making money from every single aspect of their music. If they sang at a concert, you cashed in. Performed at a private party, you cashed in. Had their song played on the radio, you cashed in. Artists didn't have creative freedom anymore. With so much money at stake, you got everyone involved to make sure that every song they put out would be a global hit. That's why today it seems like the majority of the biggest songs sound very similar. It was a race to make money, not art. And the best part of it all that money being made from having international hit songs and albums, millions of streams online, and dozens of concert appearances every year, well, most of that money wasn't flowing into the artist's pockets anymore.
So what they're talking about here is actually like, it's a complicated thing. I mean, like, I do think that a record company is generally not the same entity that applies a touring strategy or a booking strategy to your career. So generally that they would be taking money from your touring is, to not use a weird pun, it's like out of pocket, right? They don't need to be taking your money from touring. However, if they did, and if a contract actually does have that in there, I would almost say like, well, maybe there's a reason for it. Like maybe in a particular, let's say whatever record label they're talking about, that record label has experts in booking your particular genre and who know exactly how to assess your market value so they can book you in the right situations to get you going. And I think, well, if they know that and they're able to execute a strategy on your behalf, why not cut them off a percentage? Because ultimately you're going to cut off a booking agent a percentage anyway. You're going to cut off a lawyer a percentage. At some point you're going to cut off a percentage to sell high ticket live shows. And to become popular enough to sell those kinds of tickets, you probably need all kinds of publicity and stuff going on. So at the end of the day, there may be a reason for that. But what they're talking about is like when record companies own parts of your master and your publishing, they're going to make money every time you perform the song live, because when you perform the song live, you get royalties for that song. And if there's 20,000 people watching you, you may get a sizable check every time you perform a particular song live. And if a record company is baking into their contract that they own a percentage of your publishing and that they own a percentage of your master, then effectively, well, in the case of a live show specifically would be relating to your publishing. If they know that your publishing is, or if they own part of your publishing, then when you perform live, they're going to be getting money off of that. Now, you could look at that as totally unfair. You could be like, well, why is it when I perform live that they make a cut? But the fact is that if you've cut some of your publishing off to them, the label, then you are going to be cutting off part of what you could generate from your live show. Now, I would just say this. If you have a contract where for some reason you have given a percentage of your publishing, let's say you gave 10%. I feel like this would be like a more common thing that you'd see in a record label contract. That you would own all of the publishing seems pretty like extreme to me. But let's say they own 10% of your publishing. Well, what you've essentially done by giving them that 10% is you've given them an incentive to make sure that every aspect of your publishing, of the royalties related to your composition, is actually acquired. And that's no small thing, because listen, you, like 99% of the artists that I deal with do not know how to register for ASCAP. They do not know how to register for mechanical licensing. They do not know where to register for SoundScan, how to publish their credits. They don't know how to really like make sure that them as a performer or as a creator, as a songwriter, is in fact registered with every song that they put out there, and how that revenue actually comes in. It's kind of a complicated process. I mean, there's not to go too deeply into that specific topic, but there's like ASCAP and BMI, which are performance royalty collecting organizations that collect royalties for your songwriting and your publishing, whatever, the intellectual property of your song. There's a few others that collect the royalties that specifically come from satellite radio or that come from different tiers of radio that exist. It's not just one organization, it's multiple, probably like 5 different places that you want to register your song in order to have it accumulate all of the publishing royalties just in the United States. And then internationally, there's probably like there's a single organization in every country that is tracking all of the performance royalties that are associated to music that's being broadcast in those countries. But even within those, there's also secondary market organizations, the ones that get satellite radio in the UK, or the ones that get the TV royalties in Argentina. All of those things are operating at the same time, and it's actually a pretty enormous data mining effort to really acquire all that publishing. So one of the things that happens is that a lot of artists have no clue whatsoever where to register and how to register to acquire that publishing. They don't even know that they could be acquiring money off of them performing their songs live if the audiences are big enough and their set lists get adequately recorded. They don't know how to do that, right? They just don't know. And I charge clients all the time for basically the time that it takes me to describe to them exactly how to register their music, or how to go about like making sure that all of their channels are adequately registered and tracking what they do. I think that if you were to have a contract with somebody that says, hey, like, I'll fund you to be able to record this music, but once you record it, I want 10% of your publishing, it might not be a bad idea to give them that 10% of your publishing, because if you do, they are going to undertake all of the effort necessary to make sure that that 10% is as big as possible, which means that your 90% is going to be as big as possible. Whereas if you decide to self-publish, then they're going to basically say, okay, cool, you make sure that your publishing is what it is. We're not going to like necessarily help you in that regard. And I could see where that could become problematic, because, well, yeah, you may be able to register for ASCAP and you may be able to do it. Are you going to register who gets you television royalties in Argentina and then try to hit them up to make sure? No, you're probably not. But if you're with Warner Music, they're sure as hell going to do it. You know what I mean? So why not cut them off the 10%? Now, if they want to own all of your publishing, it's probably because they associated you to a producer that is giving them that requirement. It's ensuring they have to cut off your publishing, because you can't write songs and produce songs well enough to actually generate the money that they need, so they need to pair you up with a producer that can do it more. That might be why you give up your publishing, and that's a whole different story. And if that's the case, well, I would say maybe this is not the maybe the music game is not for you. I would say, if they're doing that, it's because you're an artist that is a lot more packaged and requires a lot more development on their part than would be worth it for them to do if you could write your own songs. So yeah, that's just that long-winded rant about publishing.
Anymore. It was flowing into yours.
Yeah, so if you sign a deal with a label, they basically own your rights. So it's really up to them what they pay you. And in most cases, they take 90% of the money. So everyone takes their cut. And then at the end of the day, artists are left with less than a tenth of less than a half a penny per play.
So what is it that he thinks should be going on? Does he think that he, as the artist, at the end of that chain, should be receiving the lion's share of all of that money that's generated? And again, give me an example of any industry where that's what happens. You know what I mean? Even like the owner of a restaurant, when he sells a piece of chicken for $15, does he expect to make $8 off of that piece of chicken? Or is he cutting off to this business license and to the cleaners at the restaurant, to the waiter? You know what I mean? Like there's no situation in which somebody who's at the top of the value chain is actually the highest paid. So just, pointing that out there.
This is Andrew Antar, a lifelong musician and the co-founder of a music streaming startup called Tune FM that's looking to change all of this. When online streaming platforms like Spotify came around, things got even worse.
So you can't just sign up and start uploading your masters to Spotify. They don't really have that. The whole Spotify for Artists thing is just for the social engagement and like posting pictures and text, not the actual music. So the rights holder is really still in control there.
And once they do, you take pretty much all their money.
So what they do is they use distributors, so digital distributors. They push out the song to every platform like Spotify, Apple Music, Deezer, yada yada. And so they do these blanket license deals where 70% of the revenue from the streaming service goes directly to the rights holder, the labels, and the publishers. And then they decide to pay out the artists and the other producers and the songwriters based on the deal terms that they sign. And generally, these are the sketchiest deal terms you could possibly find.
Okay, but what you just described is fair, right? So they're taking 70% of their revenue and they're putting that in the hands of the rights holders that own the rights to that music. If you don't own the rights to your music, there's something there that kept you from owning those rights, meaning you didn't actually write it yourself, or you didn't actually produce it yourself, or you did not put your own money, time, and resources into the creation of it. And that's why somebody else owns it. You know what I mean? Like, there's not the situation where like you literally wrote and produced all your own songs and then you were going to upload them to your distributor and some record label came in and said, no, we're going to own that. No, if you really own, write, and produce and create all of your own music to get it mastered and you upload it to TuneCore or CD Baby or whatever these distributors are, you're not going through a label. You're going to own that and you're going to get the money. And if your music is good and goes viral and does whatever, you are going to make that money. That's what he's describing is a situation that like you went through a label and, you probably weren't like adept at production or as far along in your craft of production to be able to consistently produce the kind of music that's going to make you money. So they paired you up with somebody that is at that level and can produce like that, and you learned a shit ton, but you didn't make that much money because you were still in the learning phase of what you're doing. Now, aside from that, what you have to realize is that like what distributors do, what CD Baby, for example, does is not a minor thing. It is not something that you could do on your own. Why? Because they're generating, number one, an ISRC code, which is a code that catalogs your music and its usage across all platforms everywhere. Okay? So what CD Baby is essentially doing is they are monitoring the streaming of your music across all the different platforms and across all the social media and taking in reports from all of the different radio stations and usages of your song and putting that all into an account. And for that, they charge you $20. Get the fuck out of here if you don't think that that's not a good deal. Okay, that is a really good deal because what they are in fact doing is they're surveying the entire worldwide landscape of where your music is being performed. And I'm sorry, but like, I don't care who you are, you do not have a team robust enough to do that. Okay, and so now that they pay out that music to the rights holders, well, okay, if a label owns the rights to your music, they may own it for a reason. Okay, but anyways, let's keep on.
In many cases, a lot of these songs are written by one guy, produced by another guy, and then performed and sung by another person. So
right, so there again, yeah, so the guy who sings and performs them is good at singing and dancing, but he's not good at writing songs, right? And the guy who's good at writing songs doesn't necessarily know how to stack a bunch of amplifiers together and get a particular guitar tone. He's not a producer, right? So he needs to take that song and put it in. All these people are adding value. So it's almost like this guy is saying, well, they pay it out to the rights holders and all these people. It's like, but because those people are adding value to the song. They're adding, something that makes the song sellable, listenable, whatever it is, right? They're not just like random people. They are people that are getting compensated for work that otherwise they would not be incentivized to do. Any one of those people could probably have gotten a great job making soundtracks for TV or doing whatever, deodorant commercials. I don't know. But like the point is like the idea that you would not cut them off anything is kind of disingenuous on this guy's part. If you think that, oh, I'm an artist and I sing and dance, but I didn't write the song and I didn't produce this song, why should you be the only one getting your publishing from the performance of the song? You see what I mean? Like, why is that the standard that people want to hold it to?
So everybody has to get their cut at the end of the day.
Now for you, this whole setup seems great and all, but what's gonna make an artist fall for it? What's gonna make them eager to sign away all their money? Well, part of it is that record labels are still the gatekeepers like we just talked about, but another reason is something called the album advance.
Okay, so here they're forecasting a particular aspect of an artist deal that I think would be important to flag, and I want to hear what they say about it. But I will just say, again, what would make an artist fall for signing away all their money? But here's the thing. If the artist does not sign with somebody or does not get into a situation where somebody has the business acumen, connections, reach in terms of publicity and the ability to know where in the market you're supposed to be, which places do we book you at, like all of this stuff, decisions that have to be made on your behalf. You as an artist don't know that. You are in a basement working on your songs, and then one day you put them out, and then you've never left your fucking city, so you don't know where to book in Denver or book in Austin or how to get into. You don't know any of that, right? So you need to pair up with an organization, a company, or a person that does, and they're not going to do that for free. They shouldn't do that for free. You should not expect them to do that for free, right? Not because you're an artist that somebody's just going to go and like say, well, I'm going to open up my Rolodex and I'm going to make sure you get booked in all of the right places so that you can make a bunch of money and then you decide how much you want to pay me. Who the hell would fall for that? But anyways, so let's look at what they're going to say about album advances.
The way that I believe in this, because you have a unique talent, Eric, very special. Don't fuck around.
First off, you promise them the world. You play up their ego, you tell them they're gonna be the next Beyonce, the next Justin Bieber, the next Drake. You make them think that you're the only label in the world that can get them there.
So like what's like the pitch they give artists? Like how do they sell the dream?
Yeah, just like the VC says, we're going to make you millionaire, billionaire 10 times over. The labels say the same thing. We're going to make you huge. You'll be on the top 10 spinning on the radio. You're going to be doing all the headlines of all the festivals and this and that. We're going to make you rich. We're going to make you famous. And it's a very hard thing to turn down. And then you see, oh, wow, this is a big company. They're a public company. They have all these other artists. You sort of trust all the social proof behind it. But at the end of the day, it's a lot of people who are not making music who are taking all the money.
Remember, most artists.
But dude, again, like you're making the music, but if you don't have any of the tools necessary with which to add those other tiers of value to it, then you're just making music. It's like a tree falling in the woods and nobody's hearing it, right? So ultimately, yeah, you want to go out there and you want to be like famous and you want people to hear your music. Well, great, you better get somebody on board that knows how to make that happen so that you can actually sit there and make the music.
Are broke, so you just gotta offer them something they crave just as much as fame: immediate money. Most of these artists have heard rumors of signing bonuses in the millions. So when you offer them $500,000 as what's called an album advance, it makes them feel like they finally made it. But unbeknownst to them, the album advance is actually just a loan they have to repay with money their music generates. But to an artist that's broke and doesn't know anything about business or finances, the album advance, that $500,000 might as well be as good as cash.
But again, yeah, so let's say you're going to open up a business, like a coffee shop or whatever, and you need to go to a bank to take out a loan. Are you thinking that they should give you that money in order to produce or create your music, and then they shouldn't have to get it back? Like, why would anybody do that? Why would anybody think that people should do that? Like, how many times did you lend a friend a few $1,000s so that they could do something and they never had to pay you back? That's ridiculous, right? So it's not like they're duping them into. They're saying, they're saying, hey, you want to put out this album and you need this money to finalize your album. We'll give you this money, but we need to make that money back through your sale of the album. That seems like, a fair deal so far to me. Now, are there things that are coming into it that maybe won't be fair? Maybe, perhaps. But I'm going to just continue along these lines and see what they have to say.
Here's how it works. A new artist comes along and you offer them $500,000 to sign with your record label. Most of these artists will sign right away without reading anything because again, they're broke, desperate with $500,000 staring them in the face. You promise them they're gonna be millionaires, that they're gonna be an A-list celebrity, while you conveniently skip over the clauses in the contract about how they signed the.
No, you conveniently skip over the clauses. It's like, listen, the whole idea that an artist can get a pass for just like not reading their contracts because they're broke when they start out, that's kind of stupid and ridiculous, and I wish people would stop saying it. Like, I wish people would stop acting like because you're an artist, you supposedly don't know how to read and you're not actually looking at your contracts. Like, listen, if you're an artist and you're going to sign a contract with a record label, you need to have a lawyer look at it. And if you don't know that you get lawyers to look at shit to make sure that it's above bar, then you shouldn't be signing contracts for $500,000, okay? And if they offer you $500,000 and you think to yourself, oh great, I'm gonna go buy a car, or I'm gonna go buy a house, or I'm gonna go buy like a thing that's not like finalizing a record, then you're the dummy. You need to take that money and you need to hopefully not make one, make 3 records. Because yes, if you have $500,000 in the bank, you could probably make 5 albums with that, or 10 albums. It depends on how resourceful you are. But my point is, like, use that money to activate your business. And if what you did is just like, oh, but I was so broke and I didn't know what to do, so I just like bought a bunch of lobster and I took all my friends out and then I flew all these chicks out to Dubai and I did all that. Bro, you did the wrong thing with your money, and now that the label wants it back is no incriminating thing to them. It's no like way in which they're being unethical with you. They gave you money to produce a product, so you need to produce that product, right? And the idea that like artists go into these situations and don't read their thing, I think that's their fault if it's anybody's fault. But let's hear it. Let's keep on hearing it.
Rights to their music and performances over to you. They'll only be getting 20% of all the money their music makes, and you justify it by telling them that all these other famous artists got the same deal. You show them the math, that once they're famous, even that 20% is going to be worth millions upon millions.
Right. So again, if the 20% is going to be worth millions upon millions, then you really have to like just consider, did you get the value that you really should have gotten? If somebody's going to give you 20% return on your efforts, meaning like they're going to give you, let's not even say 500,000, because that seems like a lot of money to me. But like, let's say they give you $50,000 to make a record, and you go out and make a record, and then they say, okay, great, for the amount of time that it takes us to get back this $50,000, we're gonna own, say, 50% of your master and publishing, and then when we make back that $50,000, it's gonna go down to 25%. This is a common way that a record contract would work. You know what I mean? Like the whole 100% of your master and publishing. I don't think that that's very common, but if it were the let's say it's like, yeah, 50%, and then it goes down to 25% after they recoup this $50,000 that they gave you. If that were the nature of your contract, then I would say like, okay, you don't have the $50,000 with which to make this album, but if you make it, then you can actually make back that money and then some, and you'll make, again, 20% of all of these sales. If those sales turn out to be in the millions or in the hundreds of thousands or whatever, you made your money back and then some. Plus you started out with 50 grand that you didn't have, right? Now, if you do stupid things with that 50 grand, or if you don't actually do the work necessary to keep the business going up, if you were thinking that, oh, I'd get to put out this album and that when I put it out, it would just be like, whatever, dude, now I've got an album out. I don't even have to think about it anymore. Then you're the dummy. You are the one who is actually derelict in your duty as an artist to actually continue on the grind, right? Like people who don't know that you have to grind in the music industry, or are surprised by it, or are worried that, or people who are like, I can't miss my, auntie's birthday because I have a gig, or I can't like, I can't do a gig on New Year's because I normally spend that time with my family, or whatever it is. It's like, honestly, like, listen, successful musicians do not think that way. right? Successful musicians are out there on the grind all the time. And sorry, like, it's not going to be what you want it to be. It's going to be what it is. Anyways, here.
You see, that 500K you offered them isn't a bonus or reward, it's literally like a check you would get if you raised money for your startup.
Right, so why should it be a bonus or reward? Or is he saying that, like, it should be a bonus or reward, but it's not? It's really money that they give you that they expect it back. Well, that's a business transaction. Like, if you expect music to operate any differently than any other business, that's kind of ridiculous. Like, it operates the way other businesses do. And in other businesses, when they lend you money, you pay that money back, period.
They have to use that money to make music videos, hire and pay their managers, lawyers, producers, create merch, promote their music, and on top of all of that, they need to budget to live their daily lives.
Right, so yes, that's what you got to do. Is that anything that's not expected of a regular adult that, again, raises some money for a startup that they're making? I know in the Bay Area here, there's a lot of people that do startups and stuff like that. When you raise money, the people that gave you that money have certain expectations of you, and you gotta pay all the people out. You have to run your business with that money that they give you. So that's not a sneaky thing that they're doing, that the record label is doing by giving you that money. That is like literally helping you have capital with which to raise a business and develop a product that then can be sold. It just seems like a normal thing to me.
$500,000 seems like a lot until you realize that one good music video can set you back almost $300,000. And even if they manage not to buy a new car, iced out jewelry, or designer clothes, that $500,000 could take years to pay back.
So yeah, listen, and I'm just gonna say this from like a business point of view. I'm not like rich by any means, but I will say this: if you make your first $500,000, do not buy a chain, do not buy a house, or maybe buy a house, but don't buy a car. Don't buy a chain, don't buy a car, don't buy Gucci, anything, don't buy any, like with your first 500,000, no way. Once you've made like 20 million or something like that, and you make another 500,000, feel free to blow that 500,000 on whatever the hell you want. But your first 500,000, definitely do not buy nice clothes, chain, car, anything like that. Those are all depreciating assets that will have no value for you in the future. So really don't do that. But, you know, that being said, you know, $500,000 to start a business and to live as an artist for a year and to make your album, dude, it's more than enough. Like, people are tripping. And the whole idea that a $300,000 music video is what you need, honestly, you can make videos in so many different ways now, and that is like the beauty of our day, of our generation, that really you do not have to have a professional crew following you around everywhere, developing this, like, you know, cinematic style content where cars are like racing each other and like with special effects from the guy that did Terminator. You don't need that in order to make your shit pop. Okay? You don't need that. So yes, a very high quality music video could set you back 300,000 for sure. But I've seen people make a 30-minute film for 50K. You know, and I've seen people make a music video for 5K that look great, you know? So literally just like this, what they're saying here is, I mean, it has some truth to it, but you know, he's also exaggerating.
That's because out of all the money they generate, only their 20% cut goes towards paying off the loan. That means their music has to make $2.5 million just to pay off a $500,000 loan. And until that loan is paid off, they're not gonna see another cent.
Yeah, but that's because the amount that's going back to repay the loan is in addition to like the amount that the record company already owns, right? So again, it makes sense. That's not a sneaky thing that they're doing. That is literally just like the way a transaction of that kind would work in any situation. But anyways.
For the artist and performer, it could be 6 months to a year or more before they see basically a pittance.
Depends on how hard you want to work. Depends on how many gigs you want to do, right? Depends on how many interviews you're willing to take. Depends on how much you're willing to invest in Google ads, or whether you're willing to fly your band out to showcase somewhere that's not going to pay you but might land you a $50,000 gig or a $2 million tour if you do it right. Whatever it is, you know what I mean? It depends on how much work you want to do. It depends on how much you're willing to risk at that point in terms of your time, your commitment, you know, family engagements and personal relationships or whatever. All of those things hang in the balance. And if you're able to put all that aside and be like, no, I'm only going to focus on my music, then yeah, 6 months to a year, it might happen. And then if it does, you're actually smooth sailing after that for a while. you know? So again, a lot of people are, I think, really surprised by how much work it takes and how much of a grind they have to be on. But, you know, you're not going to get around that in any kind of way. It doesn't matter if you do it independently or with the label or not. You're not going to get around the fact that you have to be one of those people that grinds all the time. And it may seem like a thankless job at first, but it's just what you got to do.
Of what the money that came in that they generated on these streaming platforms. You could be making millions of streams, generating millions of dollars for all these platforms and rights holders, and be getting paid, you know, less than 100K, less than 50K, less than minimum wage for the value that you're driving.
And that 2.5 million? Well, that's gonna take a little over 500 million streams on Spotify to make. That is the number of streams global superstars get, not new artists. So the cycle just continues. You offer an advance, they have no choice but to take it to survive, and they end up owing you even more money. The life of a signed artist is a life of indentured servitude, except
See, I find this really, really stupid because indentured servitude is like, you know, I mean, indentured servitude is sort of like a nice way maybe of saying like slavery. And then you're talking about like people getting, you know, like you're talking about like I don't know, like people getting whipped and you know, like people getting like, you know, physically assaulted or hurt because they're not wearing, you know, it's just like a totally different thing. You're talking about like, you know, a band that gets given money and then has to pay it back so that they can fund their tour and their operations or their whatever as a band. That's not the same as like enslaving somebody. You see what I'm like, how they're trying to paint it like there's some kind of way of talking about it that makes sense. It's literally not that. It's not indentured servitude. That's a weird way of describing it.
for the few that blow up. At least before COVID, artists had concerts to pay the record label back faster. Labels were confident that artists could pay them back.
But then all that dried up with COVID and the pandemic. Now all the shows got canceled for like years on end, and so now they're actually making.
Yeah, I mean, it's true that shows dried up, but now artists are touring again, so I don't see why that's relevant.
No money, so the notion of the starving artist is a truly real thing.
Post-pandemic, however, it's looking a lot more grim, which gave way to the next innovation by record labels, 360 deals.
There were lots of 360 deals before the pandemic. And again, I think that, you know, they're forecasting it as though it's something that is truly like sinister. Let's see what they have to say about it, because again, a 360 deal, there may be perfectly valid reasons for it, and there may be like, you know, the devil may be in the details, but there may be a perfectly good reason for you to partner with somebody in that way. What's up, Marcelo? Hey man, thanks for tuning in. I'm just talking about music industry shit, looking at videos. You feel free to rock with me. Feel free if anybody actually pops in this live and has a question or wants to debate me on any one of the points that I'm making, feel free, but I'm just like talking about music industry shit because I think this shit is fun. And it's about to be a new year and I want to do this a lot more frequently.
What do you do when concerts aren't an option anymore? You take over every other aspect of the artist's lives. Enter the 360 deal, a record deal where you can take money from every single revenue stream of an artist. Start a fashion line, you get a cut. Create a perfume, you get a cut. Start a cooking show, you get a cut.
Right, because again, if a record company has invested in creating this brand around you, and that brand is what has value, and then you start a cooking show with all of the brand value that they've created, why should they not get a cut? You know what I mean? Why would you think that, like, that, again, if I start a cooking show right now, nobody's going to watch it. But if somebody invests $500,000 in me so that I become some, you know, big guru about cooking, and then I start a cooking show, why would they not get a cut when the value that I'm generating with this cooking show has to do with the initial investment that they made in me? You know what I mean? Like, that's, again, it's not unfair. It's not sinister. It's like you don't have the capacity to do it on your own. So somebody's assisting you, and they're assisting you out of their own self-interest. But that's a normal thing. That's what happens anytime, anywhere, anytime a business gets created. That's kind of like what's going on. So
every single cent the artist is making directly or indirectly from their music or influence becomes yours to exploit. Now, artists aren't just signing the rights to their music away. They're signing their literal lives over to the record label. And for you, life couldn't be better.
And at the end of the day, the founder or the artist in this scenario becomes an employee of the funder. So they might give you $1,500K to put into a new album, and all that goes to the recording studio and the producers. You don't actually get any of that in your pocket. And artists have to take it because they don't have any other money otherwise. So they're taken advantage of.
But that's not being taken advantage of. That is being assisted in a situation where you otherwise don't have the capacity to do it on your own. Why should you not pay the recording studio? Why should you not pay the producer? Why should any of those people have to work for free so that you can have your art, right? And again, you're still going to make money off the art. You're just not going to make all of the money because you did not have all of the tools necessary with which to create it, and you had to enlist the help of other people. And if we like are able to let go for a second that we're dealing with a big bad company and a poor defenseless artist, you would be able to at least see that there's a relationship there where value is being exchanged and there's attribution and retribution, and that's a way in which things work. It's not good or bad. It is just kind of the thing. Nobody otherwise would engage in that kind of work. So I don't know. I'm not convinced yet that this guy has any legitimate claim to have been oppressed by his label or somehow made a victim by his label. It seems like if this guy's scenario is what he's in fact talking about, he literally got a bunch of money from a label and then was on the path to recouping that money, and he still must make some amount of money because he's on a beach and he's wearing Ray-Bans, and I assume that he didn't steal those. So whatever, this dude is I don't know, he's starting to make me think that he's unpleasant about the music industry dealings that he's engaged in.
In a position of weakness.
And sure, if you're an A-list celebrity, you can make money even if the deal is sleazy. But even major artists like Kanye West and Taylor Swift have had enough of being owned.
See, this is when they bring up people like Kanye West and Taylor Swift, and they try to bring them up as examples of people that didn't make the money that they were supposed to make, and these people are multi-millionaires. I think that Kanye West at some point was even a billionaire. I really think dude, if Kanye West comes out and tries to say that he did not make enough money off of his music, I'm kind of not so empathetic to it, to be totally honest.
A-list, we're talking about literally hundreds of millions of streams. Then these guys can be making what could be seen as decent money. But then they even get pissed off, and then they start to break their contracts with their labels. So you look at Taylor Swift and Kanye and Radiohead, they're all saying, you know what, we should be making tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions, not a few million here and there. But we're talking about 0.0001% of all the artists that are even licensed, and then even less than all the artists around the world.
And by now you might be wondering, if record labels are so scummy and artists end up with so much debt from signing, why don't they just do it themselves?
Right. I mean, I'm not wondering that because I see so many artists trying to do it themselves and how difficult it is and how much persistence it takes and all of that stuff, and maybe the foresight and the big business acumen and the ability to organize yourself around all that stuff is not a simple thing. So I can totally see why a lot of artists don't do it themselves, because they don't have the capacity to do it. But the very existence of that question is almost makes me want to flip it around on this person and be like, well, again, why do you think those deals exist if no artist was really incentivized to want to do that? And why is it the fact that they're incentivized to want to do it not showing you that it's probably not an inherently exploitative deal? Again, he compared it to slavery earlier. And I kind of thought, there was never anybody who said, oh, I want to go be a slave because that's going to be beneficial to me in some way. You know what I mean? But there's everybody trying to get into the music industry all the goddamn time. So why would that be the case if it were like slavery? It's really not. You know what I mean? But anyways.
Because 1, the current music industrial complex makes it very hard. 2, music still takes a lot of money to produce. But on top of that, the current financial system also makes it very hard. To pay artists directly, we would need micropayments, like paying a fraction of a penny per stream. And being that fiat charges giant transaction fees, it's not possible to make micropayments in fiat. That's where something called Tune FM comes in, which is basically the Web3 version of Spotify that's actually live and working.
Tune FM is essentially Web3 Spotify, or decentralized streaming platform. And very soon we're launching the #1 music NFT marketplace in the world, aka OpenSea for music. And we're the only ones with the technology.
And And so I'd love for this guy to like really make the case that the music industry is itself a scam, but that NFTs are not a scam. Right? Like, so that he's going to basically say, hey, you know, the way that we're going to combat this sinister music industry selling you false, you know, hopes of glory and whatever is by leveraging NFTs. It's just, it seems kind of absurd to me.
That's necessary. So lossless streaming, masters, we have no DMCA violations for people just uploading an MP3 of Jay-Z or something. And we have where you actually buy the NFT is where you can enjoy it and play it. So vertically integrated streaming platform, all the social networking and tooling and everything that you would need from the payment layer with the Hedera tokens that are native. So we're trying to change that by going direct, cutting out all the middlemen. There's more than one, there's many of them. Pay artists 10 to 20 times.
And you know, he's saying about cutting out all the middlemen, and I just want to go back to that point that they made about all these bands like Radiohead and stuff like getting out of their contracts. And I just want to say, like, what if you, whoever's listening to this, what if you had lent some very sizable portion of money to some person that went out and started a coffee shop? And that coffee shop became tremendously successful. It's got a line out the door every single day, and this person is making money hand over fist selling this coffee. And once they're making that money, they think to themselves, you know what? I don't need to pay you back for that loan that you made me for the initial coffee shop. In fact, you were exploiting me because you lent me that money at the time when I didn't have it. And now that I've started the coffee shop, I have that money and therefore I don't want to pay you. Don't you think that that's a little bit disingenuous, or not even disingenuous, that's kind of a fucked up thing to do? That you're basically saying like, well, you know, like now that we're successful, I would like to not compensate everybody for all the work that they did in making us successful, right? You're saying like, oh, you know, whoever that original booking agent was that made all of the right decisions to get us to where we need to be, like selling out stadiums or whatever, that guy he shouldn't get anything anymore. We should be able to now book it ourselves. Okay, cool. But that's nothing ethical about that, right? That's like saying like, hey, you know, buy me a house, and then somebody buys you a house and then you turn around and be like, okay, thanks, man. And then you never see him again. That's like, you know, a messed up thing to do. And so anyways, you know, here they're talking about cutting out all the middlemen. I'm just like, well, middlemen are sometimes people that otherwise, a middleman that has absolutely no business being in the marketplace, like they literally are just moving, you know, a piece of paper from one side of the desk to the other and making money off of it, that's very, very rare. Okay, middlemen or you know, middle people, whatever you want to call them, in business transactions are people that are in some way adding value by leveraging one group of potential buyers to one group of potential sellers, or one group of contacts to another group of contacts, or whatever. And that requires a lot of research and knowledge and some insight and foresight into how the market is likely going to operate for, you know, like a product like music that's quite subjective and quite difficult to predict how it's going to land. So I really think that, you know, when they're talking about cutting out all the middlemen, that's cool, and it might work for people that already have gotten their come up. But if somebody wants a come up, there's probably going to be middlemen involved in that come up, and those middlemen honestly should get paid. Like, I don't think that the idea that they shouldn't get paid is somehow some virtuous argument against like the capitalism of music, because really what this dude is trying to do is just sell you a different kind of service so that he can be the capitalist. Or they can ultimately say like, yeah, we're against these big giant record labels, that's why we're vertically integrating. Well, guess what? Vertical integration is another way of talking about monopolies, and monopolies are kind of what the record companies are trying to do but can't, because you're not actually allowed to be a monopoly. But somehow I think people think that if the artist were themselves a monopoly, that would be for some reason ethical and okay. And I don't know, I kind of think that that's a little bit whack. It's kind of weird.
And sometimes up to 100 times more if they're independent.
Tune FM already has artists like Beyonce on there, and it's run on their native Jam token, which is based on something called Hedera Hashgraph, an enterprise-level distributed ledger technology owned by Google, IBM, Boeing, and much more. This tech is already working for these giant.
And again, like, how are those people not also middlemen, right? So it's like it's owned by Google and IBM or whatever. They wrote the script that collects the blockchain information about all the transactions happening around your music, and they're taking a cut. They're taking a cut. So then, like, you know, if this model takes off and then 15 years down the line, there's going to be somebody making a video about this being like, this was the glory days when we had like, Bitcoin or whatever. We had micropayments going directly to artists, but then there's going to be some other technology that even removes the middlemen from there. It's like, hey, we're using a decentralized platform that has nothing to do with Google or IBM, and none of them are taking anything. And I'd be like, man, so it's really just like you build your castle in the sand, and then some asshole builds another castle beside it that looks just like yours and washes yours away. And ultimately, there's just like this epidemic of middlemen trying to undercut each other. And it's really coming in a lot of ways from this perception of artists and this perception that artists have about themselves, that they're somehow the most valuable people in the room at all times. And that they're at the top of this value chain, and it wouldn't happen without them, which is true, but it also wouldn't happen without all the other people that are below them working for them and doing what they do. So I just kind of think like, well, if you have, an artist who is again doing what this guy was saying, where it's like, I'm the one who's creating the art, I should be making all of the money. You're at the top of the value chain of a product, and you're getting back pennies on the dollar. It's just like what the CEO of Home Depot gets when a power drill gets sold. He's making a fraction of a penny off of every power drill. You know what I mean? The only way he's gotten to where he's gotten is because he sold a lot of power drills. So you want to make a lot of money off your songs, you have to sell a lot of songs. People have to listen to them, and you might make only a fraction of a penny, but that's because you're at the top of the value chain. Ultimately, all of those pennies trickle up to you, right? So I don't see how, if the artists themselves could scrap all the other rights holders, and they could somehow do all of this without having any of those people involved, then I'd be like, okay, do your thing and be an independent artist, and you make all the money. But if what you want is to simply be an artist where all of these people work for you, generating the value that you have, and you don't have to pay out any of them, that seems whack to me. But it's sort of being portrayed as ethical by this, what I perceive to be the counter narrative of this video that we're watching.
Companies, and it actually allows for fast and cheap microtransactions, unlike fiat or Bitcoin or Ethereum. That means whenever you play a song on TuneFM, the artist gets paid immediately. It even allows you to make money by listening to songs on TuneFM.
So you could actually make money as a curator, and also as a listener, basically get paid to play other songs that are being promoted by artists. So as a curator, if you're helping surface new music, or as a discoverer, if you're helping listen to new promoted music, you can actually get paid and be a net creditor, or hypothetically even break even. But then of course you can always buy jam, but then you don't have to worry about it's not a sunk cost, because then you can go ahead and sell jam for potentially even more money, or whatever the market price will bear. So you're never losing.
So you're essentially turning musicians and users of your platform into currency speculators with some kind of Bitcoin, some kind of music related Bitcoin token or blockchain token. And again, I'm not knocking it as something that definitely won't work. And I'm not saying that it might not lead to some artists actually keeping a larger percentage of their revenue. But it just seems kind of silly to me to portray this as ethical in comparison to what we have as a system now. It's like, why would this be any more ethical than what we have currently? I don't know. It's just kind of weird.
So if you want to participate in this music revolution, TuneFM is giving you guys 100 jam coins for free to give it a listen right now when you go to tune.fm with the link below and sign up.
Everybody just sign up at tune.fm, go there, get your free jam tokens, your starter tokens. There's sort of like a crypto jukebox, if you will, that you can actually make money with.
Great. Okay, crypto jukebox, and that's what we put our faith in for saving musicians from the inherently sinister music industry, where we have blockchain technology, like crypto bros essentially to the rescue. Crypto bros and tech, right? They are somehow the saviors of this situation. I'm not buying it.
Like a music game, and we're offering an experience that's even more invigorating and better than Spotify will ever be. And just follow us, and you'll see all the things that are coming in the pipeline. And support artists directly. When the music gets played, the artist gets paid.
You have nothing to lose by giving it a try. So
ultimately, this whole video ends up being sort of a commercial for getting jam coins. And it is kind of dated. I guess this was put out a year ago, so that, they're like way more on the cryptocurrency thing than perhaps they would be right now. But yeah, I'm going to just leave it there and then kind of say that my final conclusions are this. I don't think that there's any way in which the music industry is any more unethical than any other industry. And I think that it really gets exaggerated and played like people play that card a lot to try and say that artists are being exploited because of the very few pennies off of each dollar that actually trickle up to them. And I just think that that is such a disingenuous and unflattering way of looking at it, when I think that really what we should do is empower ourselves to identify what the right kind of business relationships are for our career as artists, and not take them at face value by any means, not just say, well, I'm not going to read my contract, but in fact make it a point to understand what the different contractual elements, what the different elements of your contract are, what the different revenue streams are, how you're going to monetize them, and then if a label is or any entity is taking a percentage, how they are going to add value to what you do in order to claim that percentage, right? So why are they getting that percentage is something that you should be very keenly aware of anytime you're cutting off a percentage. But if you are aware of that, you're likely to see that maybe in some cases it makes sense and in some cases it doesn't, or that they hand you a contract and some clauses make sense and some clauses don't, and that's your responsibility to redline that contract, to write in the terms that you think should be there and negotiate with them about what you think should be there. And just because they put together a contract that you might be too lazy to read doesn't mean that you are absolved of the responsibility of looking out for your own best interest. I don't think that anybody in any industry expects that when two parties come together and write a contract that both parties are looking out for each other's best interest inherently. They usually would think that they are looking out for each other's own self-interest, and that self-interest is ultimately going to be mitigated by the other person's or the other party's additions to that contract, right? They're going to put in the terms that make sense for them. Your other party's going to put in the terms that make sense for them, and you're going to come out somewhere in the middle with something that should be mutually beneficial. But that being said, successful artists are able to navigate those relationships well, and unsuccessful artists don't. But that's kind of like what makes anybody successful or unsuccessful, is that they navigate those different conditions well. So anyways, I don't know if this is, I don't think there's been a single person that stayed from beginning to end during this whole thing, but I am going to post this whole video eventually to YouTube, and if anybody's interested, you'll be able to see links of it at my website, which is soursoundsproductions.com. And I consult with artists all day long about how to move their career forward, what types of content to make, when to post it, how to run ads on it, how to assess the different elements of your revenue, and how to assess what the next steps should be in terms of your contracts that you sign, etc. So yeah, if anybody out there wants to send me an email, you can. It's tomas@soursoundsproductions.com, and look at soursoundsproductions.com, see what you think too. Maybe it's a shitty website. Maybe you could tell me about how I can make it better. And I can tell you about how you can make your career as an artist better. But definitely don't give in to the narrative that as a musician you're going to likely be exploited, or that or that the music industry is anything like slavery. Okay, that's such a dumb thing that they put in this video that I just really want to point it out. Like how could it be that like 60,000 songs a day are released on Spotify? That's like 60,000 different people are getting into the music industry in one way or another every single day on Spotify. How would that be the case? Why are people flocking to it if it's some kind of indentured servitude? You know what I mean? Think about where like anybody ever in history was massive percentages of the population are involved voluntarily in trying to do something that constitutes indentured servitude. It's ridiculous, right? So, anyways, yeah, don't fear the middlemen. Learn to work with them. And don't fear the companies. Learn to work with them. Don't expect them to look out for you. You got to look out for yourself. But if you do, you should be able to make money. And I hope that everybody who's an artist and a musician learns to make money and doing what they do. And yeah, if you ever want my help, you know where to find me. But this is it for now. Hope that everybody enjoyed this video. And again, I will be posting it to YouTube eventually. So yeah, be well.